It's like you think you finally got a handle on what's happening in science, right? You're feeling pretty current, and then suddenly, boom, there's this whole other field exploding, seemingly out of nowhere. It's a lot to keep up with.
I know what you mean.
Mm.
Honestly, the amount of new research coming out every day is just staggering.
Yeah.
It's a challenge even for scientists who are right in the thick of things. You have to somehow read it all, synthesize it, and then try to connect the dots across all these different areas.
It really is. So picture this. What if you had a research partner who could help with all that? Not just another person in the lab, but an AI that could process all that information and then, get this, help you generate completely new hypotheses, ideas that you might never have even considered on your own. That's what we're going to explore today, the idea of an AI co-scientist.
And we're not talking about some far-off futuristic concept. This is a real system that's already up and running. It's a multi-agent AI built using the Gemini 2.0 platform. One of our listeners actually sent us some research on it, and it details exactly how this AI works. And get this, it includes some really impressive achievements that it's already racking up.
So our mission today is to really get under the hood of this AI co-scientist. How does it work? What can it do? And maybe even more importantly, what do these early successes tell us about the potential for AI to become a real collaborator in scientific discovery? Could this be the key to speeding up those big breakthrough moments we're all waiting for?
I think so. The core idea is that AI could be like this massive amplifier for human ingenuity. It could help us sift through that avalanche of information and even suggest completely new avenues of research that we might never have thought of. It's about intelligent machines working with us to boost our own capabilities.
Okay, so let's get down to brass tacks. How does this AI co-scientist actually work its magic? I mean, it's not just about picking out keywords and research papers, is it?
No, not at all. The way the researchers describe it, the fundamental approach is generate, debate, and evolve. This framework is actually based on the scientific method itself. The system isn't just passively absorbing information, it's actively using it to generate ideas. Then it puts those ideas through rigorous testing, and finally it uses the results to refine and improve them.
I like that. Generate, debate, and evolve. It sounds like a really dynamic research environment, even if it's all happening virtually. So what's the underlying structure that makes all of this possible? You mentioned it's a multi-agent system.
Right. It has a bunch of specialized AI agents, and they all work together using something called an asynchronous task execution framework. Think of it as having a whole team of expert researchers, each with their own specialty, but they're all working on different parts of the problem at the same time. This parallel processing means it can use computing power really efficiently.
So it's like a super-powered research team, all working in parallel. Tell me more about these virtual team members. What are their roles in this whole process?
Okay, so first up, you have the generation agent. This is the one that gets the whole thing started. It takes a scientist's input, then it dives into all the existing scientific literature using web searches, and then it tries to synthesize all that information into potential hypotheses. It even does these simulated debates, either with itself or with other agents, just to refine those initial ideas.
Wow, it's like a supercharged brainstorming partner that has instant access to pretty much every scientific paper ever published. What happens next after it comes up with these initial ideas?
Well, then the reflection agent steps in.
Hmm.
This one is like your supercritical peer reviewer.
Mm-mm.
It's all about examining the generated hypotheses. It checks for things like accuracy, scientific quality, and importantly, whether they're actually new ideas. It also sees if those new ideas can actually explain observations that have already been made in the research.
So it's got a built-in virtual peer review system. That's a pretty neat way to streamline things. What kinds of reviews are we talking about here?
There are actually several different types. There's a novelty review, just to make sure the idea hasn't been proposed before. Then there's an observation review, to see if the hypothesis actually fits with the existing data. And then it goes even deeper with a full review, and even a deep verification process that really digs into the fundamental assumptions behind the hypothesis. It can even do something called a deep verification via probing questions. Basically, it challenges the logic of the idea from all angles.
Sounds pretty intense. So once the ideas have gone through this whole virtual gauntlet, what's the next step?
That's where the ranking agent comes in. It uses an Elo-based tournament, kind of like what they use to rank chess players based on their wins and losses. So the hypotheses are essentially competing against each other in these simulated debates. And the ones that hold up the best under pressure, those are the ones that rise to the top.
So it's like a scientific hypothesis tournament. That's a pretty cool way to think about it. But how do they make sure they're not just looking at the same kinds of ideas over and over again? How do they explore a wide range of possibilities?
Right, good question. That's where the proximity agent comes in. Its job is to identify ideas that are similar to each other and organize the tournament so that it considers a diverse set of concepts. This helps to prevent the system from getting stuck in a rut and make sure it explores all sorts of different avenues.
Makes sense. It's all about getting the broadest possible view of the possibilities. So, after all of that, the top-ranked hypotheses emerge from this intellectual battle royale. What then?
Exactly. And that's when the evolution agent steps in. It takes those top ideas and tries to make them even better. It uses all sorts of strategies for this. It might combine different ideas, look for inspiration from other fields of science, incorporate more research, or even explore unconventional or simplified explanations.
So it's constantly refining and improving the most promising ideas. Sort of like a tireless scientific editor working around the clock.
Exactly, and we're not done yet. There's also the meta-review agent. This one takes a step back and looks at everything that's happened so far, all the reviews, all the debates. It's looking for patterns, and then uses that information to actually improve how the other agents will perform in the future. It also creates a summary of everything for the human scientist.
Wait, so it's actually learning from its own process and becoming more effective over time? That's incredible. It's like a self-improving scientific mind. But who's in charge of this whole intricate dance of AI agents? Who's the conductor of this orchestra?
That would be the supervisor agent. It's one that makes sure all the other agents are working together smoothly and that they're staying on track with the research goals set by the scientist.
This is all mind-bogglingly sophisticated, but how do real-life scientists actually work with this AI co-scientist? Do you need to be a coding whiz to use it?
No, not at all. A big part of the design is that scientists can interact with it using plain language. They can describe their research questions, give feedback on the suggestions, and even guide the AI towards new areas, all through conversation.
That's great because it makes it accessible to a much wider range of researchers. So it sounds like it also probably taps into other existing tools and resources as well, right?
Absolutely. It uses things like web search to make sure it's grounded in the most up-to-date research. It can also integrate with specialized AI models like AlphaFold, which is used for predicting protein structures, and that helps to make the suggestions even more accurate and reliable.
Okay, so we've got a good idea of how this AI co-scientist works. Now let's talk about what it's actually been able to do. You mentioned that the research focused on testing it out in the field of biomedicine.
Yes, that's right. They specifically developed and tested it in 3 areas of biomedical research, and each of these areas had a different level of complexity.
Let's start with the first one, drug repurposing for acute myeloid leukemia, or AML. For those of us who aren't medical experts, what exactly is drug repurposing and why is it such a big deal in research these days?
Drug repurposing is basically about finding new uses for drugs that are already approved to treat other conditions. It's a really appealing approach because these drugs have already gone through a lot of safety testing, so that can really speed up the development of new treatments. In this case, the AI co-scientist was able to come up with a number of new drug repurposing candidates specifically for AML.
That's really interesting. So did these suggestions just look good on paper or was there any actual evidence to support them?
This is a really cool part. They actually did experiments in the lab called in vitro experiments to test out these suggestions. And they found that the drugs the AI identified could actually inhibit the growth of tumor cells at concentrations that would be relevant in a clinical setting. And they did this in multiple AML cell lines, KG1, MLM13, and HL60 cells. For instance, they found that a compound called KIR6 was very effective at inhibiting cancer cell growth, especially in some of these specific cell lines, and it had these incredibly low IC50 values. So it wasn't just making guesses, it was finding things that actually worked.
That's a huge deal. So the AI was actually pointing to drugs that had a real measurable effect on cancer cells in the lab. What did the experts in the field think about these AI-driven suggestions?
Well, the researchers took the hypotheses generated by the AI and formatted them like an NIH-specific aims page. That's the standard format for research grant proposals. Then they had a group of hematologists and oncologists evaluate these proposals. And the feedback was really positive. The experts thought the AI's suggestions were scientifically sound and addressed important clinical needs that weren't being met by current AML treatments.
So it passed the expert review with flying colors. That's a pretty big vote of confidence. Okay, on to the second area. Novel target discovery for liver fibrosis. How is finding brand new targets different from repurposing existing drugs? It seems like that would be a lot harder.
You're right, it is a lot more complicated. With drug repurposing, you're basically working with a known set of compounds and trying to find new uses for them. But with novel target discovery, you're trying to uncover entirely new parts of a biological system that could be targeted by future therapies. There's a lot more uncertainty involved.
So it's like you're not just searching through a library, you're trying to write a whole new chapter. What did the AI co-scientist come up with in this much more challenging area?
Well, in this case, it proposed new epigenetic targets for the treatment of liver fibrosis. Epigenetics, to put it simply, is about changes in how genes are expressed, but without any changes to the underlying DNA sequence. So they tested these targets out and actually found that when they used drugs that targeted these specific epigenetic mechanisms, it led to antifibrotic activity and even regeneration of liver cells in human hepatic organoids. Those are basically miniature livers grown in the lab.
Wow, so it's working on multiple levels.
It is. And here's another interesting thing. One of the drug targets the AI identified is already FDA approved for a different condition. So again, it's pointing towards things that could potentially be translated into patient care much faster.
It's not just coming up with ideas, it's coming up with good ideas, ideas that actually hold up under scrutiny. Now, that third challenge you mentioned, that sounded like the most complex one. Explaining the mechanisms behind bacterial evolution and antimicrobial resistance.
Yeah, that was definitely the most challenging of the three areas. Antimicrobial resistance is a huge threat, and understanding how bacteria evolved to become resistant is absolutely critical. What the researchers did here was really interesting. They gave the AI co-scientist a very specific challenge related to a discovery their own lab had recently made but hadn't published yet.
So they were basically asking the AI to figure out something that leading scientists had already discovered, but the AI had no way of knowing that. It's like a real-world test of its problem-solving abilities.
Exactly. They wanted to see if the AI could independently rediscover this new knowledge. And it did. The AI was tasked with figuring out how these things called capsid-forming phage-inducible chromosomal islands, or CFPICIs, spread across different species of bacteria. These are like little mobile genetic elements that can jump around. The AI was able to figure out the exact mechanism that the researchers had already confirmed in their lab.
You're kidding. That's incredible. What was the mechanism?
The AI figured out that these CFPICIs actually hijack the tails of different bacteriophages. Those are viruses that infect bacteria, and they use them to broaden their host range. Basically, they're using parts of viruses to help them spread to new bacterial populations. The researchers pointed out that it took the AI just 2 days to figure this out, but its solution was built on decades of research and all the scientific literature it had access to.
2 days? That's amazing. The AI essentially recapitulated a cutting-edge discovery in just 2 days. That really highlighted how much this technology could potentially speed up the research process. Were there any other interesting ideas that the AI came up with?
Oh yeah, absolutely. While the top-ranked hypothesis was the one that matched the experimental findings, the AI also generated other hypotheses that were still pretty interesting. They just weren't ranked as highly. These other ideas explored different ways that these CFPICIs might integrate into new bacterial genomes or get into new cells. Even though they weren't the main mechanism, they could still be alternative pathways that might be worth investigating further.
So it's not just generating one right answer, it's exploring multiple possibilities and generating new avenues of inquiry. Really remarkable. It seems like this AI co-scientist is doing a lot more than just summarizing existing information. It's actually engaging in scientific reasoning and making genuine discoveries. What are the key takeaways from these studies?
The researchers highlighted several key contributions. First, the AI co-scientist is showing that it can help to uncover genuinely new scientific knowledge. It can generate new, testable hypotheses across different fields, and it can even assist in the planning of experiments. It's also incredibly scalable in terms of the computing power it can apply to these problems. And all of this is happening within a framework where human scientists are still in control, providing guidance and making sure everything stays on track. And of course, the predictions have been validated in the lab, which is the ultimate test.
So the goal isn't to replace scientists. It's to give them this incredibly powerful tool that can enhance their capabilities at all these different stages of the research process.
Exactly. It's all about collaboration. But the researchers were also very upfront about the fact that the system isn't perfect. It still has limitations.
What are some of the areas where it needs improvement? It sounds like it's already incredibly advanced.
They mentioned things like the need for even more sophisticated methods for reviewing the scientific literature. They also want to improve its ability to fact-check the information it uses and to cross-reference with external scientific databases. They're also working on improving its ability to evaluate its own hypotheses, and they want to do larger-scale evaluations with more experts and a wider range of research questions. Another big limitation is that it doesn't currently have access to data on experiments that didn't work. That kind of information can be really valuable for guiding future research.
Yeah. Knowing what doesn't work is just as important as knowing what does. It can save a lot of time and effort.
Exactly. And they also talked about the need to ensure that these AI systems are secure and robust so they can't be manipulated or misused.
So it's a very promising tool, but it's still under development, and it's important to think carefully about all the implications as it continues to evolve.
That's right. But the fact that it can already generate new, testable hypotheses in all these different areas, and that those hypotheses have been validated experimentally, that's really exciting. And the fact that it can learn and improve itself over time, that suggests that it could have a huge impact on the speed of scientific discovery.
It really makes you rethink what the future of research might look like. I mean, that moment when it independently rediscovered that gene transfer mechanism, that was a real aha moment for me. It makes you wonder, what other scientific mysteries are out there just waiting to be unlocked by an AI co-scientist? What are the big challenges in your field that this kind of technology could help you address?
I think that's the big question that this research really raises. Could AI fundamentally change how we do science? Are we headed towards a future where this kind of close collaboration between humans and intelligent machines becomes the standard way of doing research, leading to breakthroughs at a pace we can barely imagine? It's a profound question, and the research we've talked about today provides a really compelling starting point for exploring those possibilities.